So I guess I wanted to. I'll get things kicked off, and then obviously, if you've got questions after 5 or 10 minutes or so, raise your hands. So the data and the sort of real time unfolding of these tools is really remarkable. But it seemed as if everything that you showed us first all the tools that you showed us required someone to actually report content. What about on the other side of things? Are there tools, or you're thinking about using tools that might be enacted before the content is even posted on Facebook? So on the content generators side of things.
So we do that for malicious content very well. So things like spam or things that might be harmful. For this, I don't think you can. Because one of the things that we've learned as we look at things is that, and we had the conversation, what if you had something that looked at the language that was getting posted and parsed it, and then threw up a reflective interface that helped the person, are you sure you want to post that? That seems to be becoming kind of angry. I think Google has kind of like the beer past midnight filter that you can turn on that stops you from sending email in certain circumstances. But what we have learned by looking at the data is that things that we might interpret as being really negative are actually well loved and liked because of because of the relationship that people share with each other. So you can call somebody a doofus or like some really harsh words, and it's actually teasing, and it brings them closer to each other. And so what we decided to focus on, especially because the intent of people creating the content tends to be positive, is on trying to make the response as easy as possible. And as the tools get better, we're going to increase the attention on making sure people are aware that they can respond to something if they see it and they disagree with it. And there's a set of tools that can do to help them navigate the response.
And how granular can the tools get? Because I thought it was really interesting when you were talking about bullying in young people that there seemed to be quite a persistent difference between the genders. So could you perhaps come up with tools that, if it's a young girl using Facebook, that they have additional layers of feedback that they can give?
Of course. I mean, I think that the way that we're going across cultures and the way we're going across ages, that is something that we have talked about. And as we go through these flows, we always kind of measure at the end, does this serve your needs in some way or another? And if the answer is no, or we're finding people that are dropping off from the flow and not completing it, we need to ask them. Sometimes it's because they realize it's not needed, which is great, but sometimes it's because the flow did not capture their experience. And so, like some of the things that we see is sometimes when people get to the place where they need to find a friend to reach out to, that they stop there. And we ended every compassion research day with a panel of teenagers. And we heard this interesting thing in the last one where some teenagers that had been bullying circumstances, they knew who they could turn to, and they felt really supported and made it easy for them to navigate that. Well, what about the people who don't know who they can turn to? What do you build for them? That is not something we've addressed yet, but we've flagged as a thing to investigate and potentially build.
Okay. As a complete non sequitur, so I'm sorry, I fear for the future of the United States, actually, based on those last few slides that you showed about cultures of sadness and cultures of empathy and et cetera. Did that surprise you that the U.S. came out like we like to communicate anger and things versus what maybe some other countries would?
Well, the thing is, it's people, and it's going to work out. I mean, to some extent, like anger might be like, I'm really angry that my team lost the thing, right? It's not necessarily anger directed at you. And so, to some extent, in order to manage these problems, you have to get handles on them, and the handles have some implicit simplifying nature to it. But at the same time, I mean, I do think for any culture, kind of being able to be aware of your emotions and then being able to choose how you communicate them in that awareness is a good thing. But at the same time, I think it's very important for us to let people be whatever the way they want to be for whatever culture they're a part of.
I wonder what else in the research as it goes on has been very surprising to you, because I mean, I imagine it might be different, the things that surprise you versus me. Like, for example, I thought, hey, it's pretty interesting that hardly anyone cared that they were violating Facebook policy, for example. Like, they really responded when they felt it was a slight on someone they knew. Like, what was it, like a minor fraction of people said, I changed it because it was in violation of Facebook policy.
When it's interpersonal, yeah. So what else do we find? So we found, for example, as we look at this across like age and genders, as you get older, you get less embarrassed, but there's more bad photos of you. So Um, I mean, the thing that is consistently surprising about this is, like when we think we know, we really don't, and we have to ask. And then you iterate on what you learn about the asking, and then you build the right experience for them. So right now, like we talked about at the previous Compassion Research Day, we built this flow for shares and status updates that was based on interpersonal conflict, and it's not getting any usage. Because what's really going on is difference in belief systems, like Red Sox, Yankees, and so on. And so in that context, we need to provide a set of tools which match that experience, and that's one of the things that we're talking about now.
Oh. Now, how quickly do you? I mean, imagine maybe it's just virtually instantaneous because there are so many users. But once you deploy the new flows and the new tools, how quickly do you start getting data back on
Immediately.
them? Immediately.
Although we're very thoughtful about how we deploy our tests. So we do it to a very small percentage of people, but given the size of Facebook, that tends to be a significant enough universe. That's significant. But then we put out a test, and we sometimes A/B test, like would you please versus would you mind, and then we have wonderful systems that immediately show us what is the difference in behavior and other variables. We have a very wonderful data infrastructure that allows us to look at these things in real time.
I wonder if you've ever had an idea or a flow or a tool that you wanted to use that based on the fundamental notion that this is all about interpersonal relationship, you thought should have worked or should have received a more or affected a more positive change, but didn't, and because it's interpersonal relationships, but it's not in person. You know what I'm getting at? Because it's still Facebook, it's still online.
Yeah, I don't know. Like one of the things that we know we want to put into the flows is kind of the pick up the phone button, or the like invite them for coffee, or like especially for once you get to certain classes of issues. Because I mean, at least that's Facebook's intent, is to help kind of people who already know each other to connect and maintain that connection. And so I think we can assume that if there's a disconnect with somebody that is one of your friends, that like it's easy that you can offer these things as resolution. Now that's not the case for other platforms where there might not be that assumption of the relationship. But no, I cannot think of anything that and one of the things that's an interesting, I think, question around this is what is the difference between the online version of this and the face-to-face version of this? Because the online version allows you a moment of reflection. In the teenager, the two reasons for asking the emotion and the intensity, one of them is to get the data to provide the right service. But also we know from working with Mark about the self-regulating moment where you become aware of your emotion and you're aware of the intensity of the emotion that actually changes your relationship to just that step there. And we saw one of the other stats that I didn't talk about today is we asked people at the end of submitting a report using these flows, how they felt about the person who had uploaded the content. And bear in mind that if you're completing these steps, it's really important for you for the content to come down. And sentiment was over 50%, like between positive and neutral was like 60%. Or even I think higher than that. I have the actual number in there. But it was positive. And it was like, wow, like even in this moment where feel like I've been aggrieved somehow, after I've sent a message, I feel not that bad about the other person. And so, but is it easier because it's offline and you have these steps and you can like pause for a moment and deal with it than it is for me to tell you directly that you did something to embarrass me in the moment when we're together? I think that's something that somebody's going to have to study.
Questions from? Please go ahead. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Have your mic first.
I had a question about looking at the emotional maps. What observations you have about how much that ties into what people think the purpose of Facebook is. A short example is I know someone in my family who uses it to complain a lot, and it angers me. But then one time they mentioned, "Oh, I love Facebook. That's where I go to vent." And I think we both have very different definitions of what Facebook is for. Some people think it's a good place to have dialogue about politics. Some people say, keep your politics out of my Facebook feed. What are your thoughts on kind of what people's definition of Facebook's mission, I guess?
Yeah, I think that there's approximately 1.2 billion definitions of what Facebook is for. Also, there's 1.2 billion definitions of what their Facebook experience is like. I've had people that tell me, my Facebook's like full of politics, and that is, well, that's your experience on Facebook. That is the set of friends and what they're choosing to communicate. The one thing that I would say about that, and it probably bears with what you just said, is that your friend is pretty sure it's probably not the function for theirs to vent without being aware of the impact that that might be having on people around them. Because I'm sitting in the computer and I don't get any of that feedback. And one of the larger questions that we're holding with this work that we're going to explore in different forms where this surfaces, like we haven't really looked at comments, but comments, somebody says something and then somebody says something that's really provocative, that some people are provoked, but other people are hurt by it. And one of the questions that we're looking forward to exploring in the coming years is what happens if you connect the feedback and say, hey, that thing that you intend to be provocative was actually hurtful. And does that actually change the things that you're willing to post? But I will tell you that everybody who's posting things, almost everybody like wants to know the impact of what they're doing, because it's like whenever you bring it to their attention, like, wow, I didn't know, thank you for telling me that. Well, at least 90% of the cases. You still get the 10% that goes sideways, but.
I'm gonna bounce from side to side. So does anyone on this side have a question? Oh, we have a Twitter question? Okay.
Hello, internet.
How do you balance the frequency of changes to newsfeed and how users interact with constantly improving experience?
It's a learning process for us. We're really committed to creating value and providing this service to the people who use Facebook. We actually understand how change impacts people. And we're trying to figure out what is the best way that we can communicate, what is the purpose behind our changes, so that people like feel more at ease when there's transitions, when they happen. But I can definitely say that we're kind of mindful that changes can be disorienting for people, and it's always a learning experience to us how we can be providing them the right experience in this context. There's a lot of people working on that.
Did you have a question? Yeah. Wait for the mic.
Specific and a broader question. This is, do you find any correlation between the latency of how long something has been posted and the kind of response when people are asking for takedowns and things like that? You sort of alluded to a cooling off period, and I wondered if people react to something immediately, they might react one way. Do they react differently if things have been up later? And the second question is, all of this wonderful work, some of the way it was presented is around triaging, fixing smart systems that don't seem like. To what extent have your insights influenced more general product design strategy for the whole company?
The latency question.
Latency question. So here's what we know about latency. How long the content has been up, I don't think we've seen any major fluctuations there, because part of it is discovery. And so if you're tagged in the content, you find out very quickly. Sometimes somebody tells you about it, but it might be a nature of how often you're online, and so there's some variability there. Response, as far as we can tell, is like almost immediate. So like if somebody clicks, it goes into the flow, and they're having the emotional response to it, they like either see it through, or they might like go back shortly afterwards. Like they might start and then stop and then come back and see it through. But we know that happens in a short time frame. The one where we've seen a more lag, because it actually helped us figure out our measurement, was on the content creator. So you get the message, and the content creators don't necessarily immediately respond to it. But we checked, and if there's like a window of 24 hours or so, then we'll catch that the content creators that will either respond to the message or delete the photo that was initiated by the original message. We do provide an experience on some platforms where if you're the content creator, you can say, respond to this message. And we do the same kind of guided response, embedding some gratitude and other things that we say, hey, thank you for the response, but it's important to me. And so we do facilitation on that side, though not on all platforms yet. But we have found that people see the message and they get it, and then sometime in the next 24 hours, they will choose to act on it. Again, in most cases, like depending on the emotion, the likelihood that that action is going to happen within 24 hours.
And broader, how the work flows into broader product design at Facebook?
So the lessons that we've been learning, I think people have liked and put to good use. I think a favorite example of that is when we did our most recent redesign of the privacy settings, we actually looked at language that, like, who can see my stuff, right? And because this is how people talk about these things with each other. And we try to be more focused on what is the need that you have, that you're trying to complete, than it is what are our abstractions for these things. Like, I've written that code a number of times in that product. And our intent has always been have a set of tools that's really clear for you that helps you deal with this. But there's kind of this learning of what that means to us, and then what that means to the people who use the product. And I should have said this at the beginning, but like the bar that I'm trying to do for the work is my son is 12, right? And so next year he's on. Or like my mom is in her 60s, late 60s. And so try to, whenever we look at these flows, that's the bar that I'm thinking of. It's like, how would she think about it? How does my son think about it? How does my best friend mechanic guy think about it? And then try to come up with a language that matches their experience. And by the way, failing with what I come up with, but knowing that we can ask.
Yes, here.
I think today we really learned about how fast technology is mastering emotional intelligence. And could you comment on a concern, if you have one, of the dark side of the concentration of that understanding as compared to individuals using those tools? Because we've heard a lot of positive things, whether it's from autism, all that kind of thing. But it seems that as this becomes more understood in a aggregated way, it could be harmful to an individual.
Yeah, I mean, I think that can be said about so many things, right? But the way that I've thought about this, and I can speak for Facebook on this part, that the trust that people have on us, right? They're trusting us with information, with the relationships, the things that they share with each other, is something that's extremely important for us. At the same time, it's important for us to not want to prejudge an outcome to a situation. Like in all of these flows, we're not like, you should take the photo down or like refactor or anything like that. It's very important for us for people to dialogue with each other in a way that's respectful. That's what we offer. If they choose not to, fine, that's what they choose to do. But other than that, like we don't want to prejudge the outcome either way with anything that we know about the space or the tools. Because really, like we're here to serve across different cultures all over the place, people from all sorts of backgrounds, emotion, genders, and everything like that. So I think on the part of Facebook, we do take that into consideration. We try to be very thoughtful about the way that we apply what we're learning from this.
You know, you showed us an example vis-a-vis bullying where you were actually creating tools that people could take offline. Do you have other examples of
No,
that?
but we're hoping to do more of that. Like a good friend had the observation that. So I went to a bullying conference hosted by a bunch of teenagers, and at the end, this girl came up to me, and she said, "I wanted to tell you that a friend of me loaded an image, and it really stressed me out. And I didn't. No, it wasn't in front of her. So it was somebody she didn't know. And I used the tools that you gave me, and I sent the person a message, and they took it down, and you made it really easy on me, and thank you for that." And I think that it is that kind of experience that that we kind of want to honor, and then if it worked well for you, we're talking about exposing to the person going through the experience what were the pieces that made that work.
On this side. Yes, they're in the back, please.
I think one of the things that scares me about the internet is the whole generation of cyberbullying, which I think on Facebook is a little bit different because people have to take responsibility for the posts. It's always attached to their name, but I could still see it being a huge issue. And I liked that there are tools for like the offline stuff. And I also like that you're trying to help these kids respond. But what I was wondering was, it's really hard if you're a victim of bullying to always stand up for yourself. And even if it's online, I can imagine many children who wouldn't feel comfortable sending that bully a message. And so I was wondering if there's any other alternative you can give to kids. Like, can there be anonymous, like I know there's sort of I can see problems with that, but is there a way for either like Facebook to say this could be considered bullying, maybe you should think about that, or if the children could send anonymous things? Have you thought about anything expanding on that?
The most important thing we've learned in that circumstance is, yes, you're not up to stand up to yourself, So number one thing is get support from somebody you trust, right? And so that's always, and in the right flow, that's like top and center, and it's like the start. Now, any teenager that goes through this flow, at the same time, there's a report submitted to Facebook, and we look at it, and to the best of our ability and judgment, we make a decision on whether we think it is something that affects our policies for harassment in this context. And then if we do take the piece of content down, we will warn the person from the Facebook voice that the content that they uploaded, we do that. We have begun exploring the possibility of what you can do on part of the content creator. In the case where it's intentional, again, very small in volume, but super important in practice. But that's work that we've not yet done. But making sure that the teenager has resources for themselves, like we have this, like it's not about you, wrong, get support. They read all the stuff that I talked about. There's a guide for them, and at the same time, reach out to a trusted person, and we have a guide for the trusted person. Because we have found circumstances where they reach out to the parent or to a friend, and the parent gets angry, and then they want to like go against the bully, and that might just help the situation escalate. And so you want to provide the right tools for everybody in this system of people that's working on this.
On this side, in the back there.
Can you talk about Facebook's thought process of finally adding the dislike button and why it took so long?
There's no dislike button.
I mean, is it a mic or?
No?
It's not there yet. Well, is it going to be added?
So we don't talk about that stuff we talked about a test that we ran at the previous Compassion Research Day with something that was called Sympathize, but we generally don't like to talk about that before we like build it and test it and it's available for people. As a company, we try to be like really grounded with the stuff that we talk about, and it's the stuff that we offer at that point in time. But I will tell you that I think that the most useful interaction to have when you have kind of like dislike or negative reaction to something is to, like, one, be aware of what's the nature of your reaction, and then in the knowledge of that, choose whether you want to have a private conversation with the other person. Something that we have seen is when you have a Facebook group, even if it's like pretty close and a few people, is that if somebody says, blue is the best, and the other person says, no, it's really red. If it's in an open group, chances that that's going to converge tend to be pretty small, because I think people kind of play off to the room that they're in, and they're like, are disagreeing with each other. See an email where somebody says, I think that thing needs to be purple, and then email down says, no, I think it needs to be blue, and then the next email, no, this is really why it needs to be purple, and no, it really needs to be blue. If it doesn't converge into emails, I think it generally doesn't happen. But if you take those two people and you take them outside of the room of people that they're in, be it in an email thread or in a Facebook group, and you have them talk to each other, then I think there's a higher chance that either like agree to disagree or like see what each other needs and find somewhere in between. I think that's really hard to play out in an open space. So if you dislike or disagree with somebody, posting in front of all of your friends, I think that's complete BS. I completely disagree with it. It's going to have one dynamic that's going to politely lead for the person to defend why it is that they did this, versus if you take the conversation private, that might lead to a mutual understanding of what is going on. And so these kind of mechanisms where right now the option at Facebook is, I don't want to see this, which is pretty low in the emotional rating scale. And then it takes you into these kinds of options that you can say, well, it's annoying, all the way through to I shouldn't be on Facebook, and then the social stuff that we're talking about.
Just want to go back to the question about I guess the generalizability of what you're teaching your users. It seems to me that this is an opportunity for them to learn social skills and emotional intelligence actually in a number of different domains. And I wonder how much this is generalizing past their interactions online with each other into their regular lives. So on the one hand, from psychotherapy research, we know that the skills that people learn in one context are hard to generalize to another context. On the other hand, they're getting an opportunity for very directed feedback in a way that is unambiguous. So it's really the best example of sort of in-the-moment social skills training that you could imagine almost. And even though it might be beyond the scope of your company, in some ways I wonder if this isn't an opportunity for socializing people or exposing people to different cultural values in a way that is instructive maybe and helpful in a broader socially responsible way?
I think it's important for us to be the least out of the way in the unfolding of the conversation and just provide this kind of frame of like respect. But at the same time, we have talked about, and hopefully at some point we'll offer at the end of the step the option for somebody to learn more, so they can self-select into getting a more thoughtful lesson around it. At the same time, we have chosen people to partner with, and they're invited to write about what we're learning and what we're practicing on that, and in a way that is both like academically accurate and like people can review and all of that, and at the same time can also help get the word out about the things that we are learning. But I think in the context of the product, well, we could take it each step and kind of put a little bit more kind of teaching in it. We think in the context of the experience, we want to make it to the service of the resolution.
I wasn't asking if you want to teach them more. I was wondering about the generalizability. Just going through the flow, have they learned something now that they can generalize to their social skills offline? So maybe what you're doing actually has a broader impact than just helping them through a little interaction. Maybe it's actually, this morning people were asking questions like, does interacting with technology, is that going to influence how humans interact with each other? And I'm wondering, if you teach people how to do conflict resolution through a Facebook interaction, does that generalize? Maybe it has generalized effects outside of that context, in which case this would be a pretty powerful way of teaching social skills and conflict resolution skills well beyond what you originally imagined.
That would be pretty cool. No, I mean, it would be.
It seems, I'm just wondering if you're interested to study that, or if you have people who are...
So what I'm interested what we're interested in studying about that is kind of most directly is the direct behavior over time. If somebody wants to hold that question and outside of that context, and we're like happy for them to go study that. I just want to make sure that like I love that question. Actually, that question of like, what are the implications of this to like. And so it's, when we do the compassion research days, the audience is super fascinating. It's this mix of teachers, some sort of like the wisdom crowd, computer geeks like startups and engineers, and then scientists like social scientists primarily, also but from other backgrounds. And I love the eclectic mix of that because I think, as we saw this morning, that there's all of this wonderful potential from all of these disciplines kind of fooling around with each other. But I love that question, and I do hold that question as we do the work. But I'm very clear that like my role and Facebook's role with this is to be very focused on building in a way that we can measure, leveraging specific kinds of knowledge. And there's all of these really big questions around the work all over the board. And for example, one of the things that Mernalini from Yale is going to be working on is, so we're partnering with them on the bullying data set that we have to learn. And they have these wonderful questions about what does that mean for bullying and our understanding of it. And that's something that, again, I love the question of that and help enable that. But at the same time, if it doesn't help the product and the people who use Facebook immediately, then that's kind of the focus that we have.
Back to this side. There in the front. Go ahead.
Got the 10 minutes.
I'm making you run. Yeah, I'm sorry, Dave.
That's okay. I usually run around trying to hand him mics. So just to go along with that, you have the data. Well, I'm just wondering, like, as people are resolving their conflicts via Facebook, and saying, yeah, I'll go ahead and talk to this guy about it. Do you ever follow up on that to see if those people are complaining less now that they've learned to solve their own conflicts?
That's one of the questions we're going to be exploring in the next year, now that the systems have been up for some time and are now in a form that we're comfortable with. So yes, we'll be asking that out of the data that we have.
Oh, we'll go take a Twitter question. I know he's actually in the room. Smart.
Question. This is a question posed via Twitter. You showed emotions of content creators whose content was reported. How do the emotions of all content creators differ? So you had shown the slides of, yeah.
All of our studies are centered around the emotional intent of the people who create content that get reported and the people who report the content. We haven't studied, at least in this context, that I could speak to the emotions of people outside of that universe.
Yes, there.
Hi, thanks for a great talk. So throughout today, there's been some interesting conversations about culture, and I think that's inherent with emotion and technology because technology really bridges the world in a lot of ways. And so what I was curious about was in the slides where you were showing representation of the different faces that were sent and sadness and happiness and so forth. That's sort of like a generalized view, and I'm wondering if Facebook or you feel that you have an accurate representation of the way cultures are expressing emotion, or if that's sort of too generalizable and that there's a lot more individual nuance there with the way people are using that. And I mean, to take it with a grain of salt because that was just based on stickers sent, and that's like, whether or not that's an accurate proxy for it is perhaps debatable.
Yeah, sticker sets are a really interesting proxy. And so we have like the top end sticker sent for all the different sticker packs. We have tons of different sticker packs. And one of the things that was really interesting for us to see was on the very top, smileys, just like all over the place. Next up, love. Across all the other sticker packs, little hearts and smileys, the heart. And then you start getting into like the other emotions as you go further down the list. What that means to the people with regards to what's the emotion they intend to express and it gets received is interesting. As I said, like the angry one might be communicating so many different things, right? And even if you look at the language around it, there's a question of how much of that you can infer. And so at least for this work, what we've settled up on as an approach to that is like when we have a question like that, we just kind of ask. And people will tell us, and they'll be really good about telling us. When we began doing some of these things, we're like, will people be accurate when you ask them? What are their biases when you like ask them and they're less likely to responding? But we've shown over and over again that people will respond. And then you build the things that's based on the responses, and then usage goes. And so, but we haven't really asked people what they intend to communicate emotion was with each other. On the other hand, in terms of like people coming in each morning and saying that they're happy, looking forward to a great day, being pumped, there's all of this interesting emotional dynamics that happen. That I have. Remember, Facebook's a big place, and I focus on turning bad experiences into good ones.
Question. One more question.
Okay. I'm actually going to take it. Sorry, everybody. No, so you said that your son next year, he's going to be 13.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious, what are you going to tell him about how he should use Facebook? I mean, you're doing all this deep insight into, interpersonal, both positive and negative relationships, conflicts, and how to resolve them online in this social space. What are you going to tell him?
So I've had the first half of that conversation with him already, because he got an email address, and he's got iMessage, and he's got a means of communicating electronically with his friends, And the biggest thing I told him was, look, what do you do if somebody says or posts something that you do that is uncomfortable to you or like upset you somehow? It's like, go talk to them. I'm like, like we talk about like not assuming intent. We talk, of course, by the way, and you talk a little bit about this, by the way, for those of you in the room that are parents, the number one failure state I've seen over and over again is there's all of these things that we know as parents to help our kids when they navigate something in a playground. If you're in a playground, you keep an eye out on them and you know who they're talking to. If like somebody comes at home and has an interpersonal issue at school, there's all of this knowledge that we have. And for a set of parents that I've talked to over the work that I've been doing here, they tend to have all of this amazing knowledge and experience, and they check it at the door when it comes to technology because they don't understand technology, they don't know what's going on. Technology is life, it gets weaved into it, it's just part of that. And what you know about life applies to technology. Everything that we talked about today, you take the technology away and it's like, well, have people talk to each other, have people express emotion to each other. I mean, there's things that we know about how to support our kids. And so I've been trying to be clear about what those principles are for my son. And then I've been trying to make sure that he applies those principles to technology. The other thing I would tell him is that like he is responsible for his experience on Facebook and his relationship to technology. So if his newsfeed is full of crap, it's his responsibility to like curate his friends, and you can hide people, or there's all sorts of tools that either notify or not notify depending on what you intend. But it's your responsibility of that experience. If you're spending too much time on it, like it's your responsibility to manage how much time you spend on it. We're like, how much time you spend on your device? Well, your responsibility is to get your homework done. And if your homework doesn't get done, then like, and so we're trying to kind of emphasize that sense of personal responsibility in the relationship we have with the technology that we have in our lives. Because I think at the end of the day, like as you grow up in life, that's what you have. And if you spend too much time online, then it's kind of your responsibility to do so. And there's tools that can help you with that, but you have to start from this place of doing that. And so I hope that as my son grows up, he knows that when things get emotionally uncomfortable, reach out to the person, or if he doesn't feel comfortable doing it, reach out to somebody that he trusts. And then that he knows that he owns his relationship with the technology so that it can be a healthy one.
Well, thank you so much. It was really, really fascinating to hear you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.